Once Told Tales, as read by the author Rick Tobin. A Clumsy Dragon by Rick Tobin. Periwinkle was the world's clumsiest dragon. Everyone told him so. Other dragons laughed at him. Periwinkle was sad. Periwinkle wanted to run, fly, and snort fire like all the other little dragons, but he just could not. His mother, Fire Moth, told him he was wonderful. His father, the mighty Sunburst, was the greatest among all the dragons in the world. He loved Periwinkle too, but Sunburst could not help Periwinkle. Periwinkle could not fly. Periwinkle could not spit fire. Periwinkle just liked to sniff at the fruit in the trees. One day, Periwinkle kept falling over his tail as he ran through the apple trees. He was so frustrated. He stamped his little dragon feet on the ground. When he did, some apples popped off the branches. Some hit him on his scaly head. "Boo!" whimpered little Periwinkle. "I'll show you!" Periwinkle rolled the apples on the ground toward him, using his green shiny tail. The rustle of his spines made funny clicking sounds along the rocks under the apple trees. Soon Periwinkle had a pile of 10, then 20, then 30 apples. "I'll teach you not to fall on me," he said to the pile of red juicy fruit. Periwinkle loved to throw little rocks. He had no one else to play with, so he had become very good at throwing stones high in the air. He began to do the same thing with the apples. He threw 7 in the air, but they were not like the rocks that flew far away. No, they were heavier, and they began to fall back on Periwinkle's head. "Oh, oh, no, 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 no!" he yelled as a tiny snort of fire came out of his nose. That had never happened before, as he tried to make a spark for his mother and father. But he barely noticed as the second apple hit him. And there were 5 more coming. Tiny Dragon tried to save himself by throwing the next apple to reach him back up into the air, but not quite as high. Getting a little tired, but he threw the next one up and the next one. Each time he threw them up a little lower. Before he knew what he had done, Periwinkle found himself juggling fruit. He did not know it, but dragons had never juggled fruit before. In fact, no dragon had ever juggled anything, ever. Periwinkle spent each afternoon for a week learning what his new way of playing was all about. There were plenty of apples everywhere around the orchard. Dragons did not eat apples. No one ate apples. Nobody liked the way they tasted. Periwinkle had tried to eat one once, became sick. Ugh. Sunburst just laughed at him, but his mother had scolded him for doing such a silly thing. "You might as well have been eating rocks," she told him. Periwinkle learned to juggle. He would drop an apple now and then, especially when he would try to do something new, like juggling with his eyes closed or turning around quickly. This would irritate him. He suddenly found that if he dropped an apple, more and more fire would come out of his nose. This was wonderful. He did not tell anyone what he had been doing, and by the end of a week he was snorting out so much flame that he almost set a tree on fire. Instead, he accidentally cooked a pile of the apples he was using to juggle. Periwinkle sniffed at the apple pile. It smelled very different than the apples on the tree. "This might be bad," he said to the apples, which were continuing to ooze and roasting below him. He sniffed again. The aroma was very interesting, but not like the fish Fire Moth brought from the sea, not like the meat Sunburst brought from the mountains. Periwinkle took a little lick at the sweet liquid coming from the pile of scorched fruit. He smiled and snorted a little flame. It was delicious! Not only could he juggle now, but he could make fire. Periwinkle could now cook, and he could cook a wonderful new thing that no dragon had ever eaten before. He was very proud of himself. He played, rolled, juggled, and ate until it was time to go home. But he could not eat supper because he was full of apples. Fire Moth was concerned. She sniffed at his nose. "Have you been eating something strange again?" she asked. "Oh, Mom," said Periwinkle. Sunburst suddenly rushed into the cave where they lived. He was nervous and fidgety. "Dear, what is it?" asked Fire Moth. "Tomorrow," replied Sunburst, "the giant is coming to the canyons. He wants a gift of some kind from us, or we have to leave his land." "His land!" yelled Sunburst. The cave walls shuddered under his voice, and smoke from his nose filled their home. "What shall we do?" asked Fire Moth, and she and Periwinkle hugged Sunburst in fear.
Balus was good as his word, and appeared early the next morning.
Sunburst brought the feathers of the rare rainbow bird. Sulphur Eye, another dragon, brought a piece of coal that forever burns. Red Flame, another friendly dragon, brought a rare emerald as big as a boulder. It flickered green sparks all over the dragon's canyon. Soon the giant had a mound of wonderful treasures before him, but he was not satisfied. "I have seen these things and many more. I will give you one more chance. Have you nothing to give me to prove I should let you stay in my canyon?" None of the great dragon lords answered. None of the dragon ladies answered. None of the dragon children said a word. No one had anything to offer. No one except Periwinkle. "I have something," he squeaked. The giant laughed heartily. Sunburst and Fire Moth tried to pull him back behind them, knowing that the giant might strike their only baby, but Periwinkle wriggled free. You giant, if you follow me, I will show you something no one has ever seen before." "Ah," said the giant, "if this is true, I will not only give you this canyon, but 3 more like it forever. But if you are lying, you'll have no chance of staying. You'll have to move today. No waiting." Balus smiled because he knew he would have the canyon back to himself. All the dragon families and Balus followed Periwinkle as he tripped and stumbled his way to the apple orchard. Balus and the ground dragons had some difficulty walking round all the trees, but soon they were at an open field. They watched as Periwinkle gathered up a pile of bright red, crisp apples. "Oh dear," Fire Moth whispered to Sunburst. "Oh dear." It was very quiet. A few of the little dragons whispered and giggled at Periwinkle. Periwinkle the Clumsy. "Well?" shouted the giant. Then Periwinkle began. One after another, he threw the 7 apples high in the air. One almost hit the giant's nose. Soon there were 7 more, and 7 more, and more, and more, and with the minutes, the sky was filled with apples flying as if they were flower petals in the wind, all being twirled and twisted by the little dragon's hands, wings, tail, and feet. It was wondrous. The dragons all gasped, especially Fire Moth and Sunburst. Periwinkle could see his father smile in a way he had never seen before. Sunburst gave Fire Moth a hug and wrapped his wings around her shoulders. "Enough!" commanded the giant. "This is why you take Balus to the trees. I have jugglers in my castle that can do this, and not with those stinking apples. Nobody likes them. They taste awful." No sooner did Balus speak than the apples fell to the ground, a perfect circle stacked all on top of each other. A blast of heat and orange flame roared out of Periwinkle. Even the giant backed away. The sounds of "ooh" and "ah" came from the crowd of dragons. "And now, giant, come close if you dare for the surprise of your life." "Ha, ha!" mumbled Balus. Periwinkle whisked the smoke and fire off the pile of juicy apples. He dug through the spot he knew would have the best tasting ones. Here, I dare you to eat this, Periwinkle shouted in his little mousy voice. Balus hesitated and then took the fresh cooked fruit from the tiny clawed hands. He put it in his mouth. The dragons held their breath. Balus said nothing for a while. Then he reached down into the pile and swept it up into his mouth. A great laugh came from his belly once he swallowed it all up. The trees shook. Small rocks rolled down from the canyon walls. "A baby dragon," he laughed, "that juggles fruit, and makes apples into delicious food." "More than enough," Balus shouted. "The canyons are yours, but you must teach me how to make this wonderful new thing." "Of course," said Sunburst. "Absolutely," said Firemoth. "Maybe," said Periwinkle. All the dragons shuddered. One moment they had a new canyon. Now Periwinkle might anger Balus and they would lose everything. "Oh," said Balus, "only maybe? Tell me, what else do you want besides 3 canyons, little cook of the dragons?" Periwinkle could not run up close enough to the mighty giant, and in frustration he found himself flying for the first time ever. He slipped and began falling, but the giant caught him in his huge hairy hands. Said Periwinkle, "I want you to come and play with me." The sky was still. Everyone, including the giant, was absolutely still. Sunburst held his breath, wondering how he could save Periwinkle when Balus decided to crush him, for he had a horrible temper. There was no anger. No, there was rain. Cascade of flowing giant tears from Balus. No one had ever asked Balus to play with him, even when he was a young giant. The other giants called him clumsy and left him alone to play by himself. So it was. Periwinkle grew to become the great king of the dragons. Balus became the wise king of the giants. Cooked apples became a favorite food of both, and to this day, when you hear the thunder rolling down the canyons from some far-off mountain, know that it may be Periwinkle and Balus, juggling and cooking with their favorite fruit, apples. For there, in the apple orchard, are the Clumsy Dragon and the lonely giant, playing together, no longer clumsy, and never again lonely.